You are indeed watching Breakthrough News, and this is The Freedom Side. I'm your host, Eugene Puryear. Welcome back for those who have watched us before. Welcome for the first time for anyone who's just joining us. Very happy to have you here on Breakthrough News with us as we go through what is a fantastic program here tonight. We've got Jackie Lukman, we've got Ben Norton, we've got Dennis Rogachuk, we've got workers coming from the front lines of the fight for 15. So we're touching on a range of the most important issues from Ecuador to Evanston, if you will, in terms of people's struggles that are happening all around this world. So as we always do, as we start the show, ask everyone to just take a quick second, hit that share button wherever you are, wherever you're watching, so that whoever is following you can follow us in this fantastic program that we have here tonight about some of these critically important issues. So take a second, hit that share button, maybe text some people, call some people, whatever you feel you need to do. Just let as many people know about this stream as you can and send them here, because we're going to have quite a bit of information for you here this evening. So as we get started, let me just check in real quick with our technical impresario here, Juan in the booth.
I got a bald head.
You do have a bald head, looking. I almost said seasonal, but that's actually not seasonal. But looking sharp, looking sharp.
Thank you. I watched the Britney documentary a second time. Britney is my
You were
spirit
inspired?
animal. She inspires me.
Well, you know what? I think she inspires millions of people. Hashtag free Britney. I'm all
Hashtag free
for that.
Britney.
I'm all for her controlling her own money. I actually
we're on
don't
the
know that
freedom
much about
side.
it. We are on the free. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay, well, Juan, we'll talk more as things go through. I don't know if it's going to be about Britney Spears, but just to just to jump right into this here, we want to bring on our first guest. Very happy to have with us Jackie Lukman, who is the editor-in-chief of Lukman Nation, also the co-host of what I have to say is one of my favorite radio shows out there, By Any Means Necessary. Jackie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on again, Eugene. Good to see you. Good to be here.
No, the pleasure is all ours. So before I ask you any questions, Jackie, I want to help set up some of our current moment for people where we are as we speak here. There's some back and forth around what's going to happen with this stimulus. Looks like they're going to drop the $15 an hour minimum wage. They've cut a number of people out of the checks. And, some are saying that this is a little bit duplicitous. So we just wanted to go revisit the history of some of these things that have been dropped, just to give people some context for, I think, the level of anger that many people are rightfully feeling about the Democratic negotiating strategy. So we want to just start here with some of President Biden's comments regarding his feelings about the $15 an hour minimum wage on the campaign trail.
It is long past time we have a $15 federal minimum wage.
It's long past time we pass a national $15 an hour minimum wage. I think it's long past time that there's a minimum wage of $15 an hour. It's long past time to be a $15 federal minimum wage.
$15 minimum wage.
$15 minimum wage.
$15 million, $15,000. $15.
National minimum wage should be $15.
Long time coming, but before we jump right into it, you'd think that he would have more urgency, but I just also want to show this clip. Now, remember what you just saw about how it's a long time coming for a $15 minimum wage. This is what he told CBS like 2.5 weeks ago about the $15 minimum wage now that he's actually the president, no longer a candidate.
You also want to raise the minimum wage to $15. Is that something you would be willing to negotiate on in order to get Republican support?
Well, apparently that's not going to occur because of the rules of the United States Senate.
So you're saying the minimum wage won't be in this?
My guess is it will not be in
it. Quite a different tune there. Jackie, my first question for you, is it possible that the Democrats could seem any more sorry with the way that they have carried out this ridiculousness around the stimulus?
I mean, if by sorry you mean like apologetic, they're not that at all. But if you mean like really ridiculously pitiful, yeah, I don't think they can be any more just horrifically lame and spineless. I mean, listen, the Biden administration, everybody, all of them, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, anybody involved with the administration, except for like the people who work at the White House, they all knew that the proposal for raising the $15, the minimum wage to $15 an hour was not going to survive in the COVID relief bill. But that's why they put it in the COVID relief bill. Joe Biden's been in the Senate for 180,000 years. I mean, he knows the rules of legislation. He understands the rules of the Senate. He knew that the parliamentarian was going to rule against that financial proposal being in the COVID relief bill that was, so I mean, or rather the regulatory proposal. See, he's clear about these ridiculous rules because he's been in the Senate for so long. So there was no way that he didn't know that this was going to be ruled, against and kicked out of the COVID relief bill. And the really bad thing about this is that in the Trump administration, when the Senate parliamentarian did the same thing to the Trump tax cut bill, the Republicans just fired the they just fired the parliamentarian. And they were just like, well, you know what? Not only do we not like your recommendation, but we don't like you for making it, because that's all it is. It's a recommendation. And they just put somebody else in the position to do what they wanted to do. The Democrats don't have the spine to do that for working people. But the Republicans did that with no problem for a bunch of rich folks. So, yeah, they couldn't be any more just pitiful and sorry. And honestly, they're traitors at this point. They're traitors to the people. And I think it's pretty clear.
I think that's 100% clear when you just look at the level of urgency that we were all put forward, Jackie, in the end of last year. And then, even after Election Day, because of the runoff in Georgia, it was as if, if you didn't support Biden, that somehow you were the worst person ever, that he was guaranteed to do these different things. He said, I'm not going to deport someone in the first 100 days. He's now deported thousands of people. I'm going to do a $15 an hour minimum wage. Then they don't do that. We're going to give people a check. They don't do that. Maybe this is, how sustainable does this feel to you, Jackie? Obviously people have been, putting up with bad politicians for a long time, but this just feels so egregiously wrong. Maybe I'm just being Pollyannish, but it just feels like this is so out of touch that it has to have some negative effect on these people, and they can't just go with the same song and dance moving forward, that they really care about working class people.
I think the negative effect is going to be felt in the midterms. I think going on this track, because, what has happened to the $15 minimum wage, what's happened to the $2,000 stimulus checks that, we said, like you said, that Biden told us that they're going to be out the door if we send Ossoff and Warnock to the Senate. And now it's $1,400, and now maybe not so much of that. The same thing is going to happen to this voting rights bill, HR 1 that the House just passed. Same thing is going to happen to this ridiculous George Floyd Act, and I'm almost glad that that's not going to go anywhere. But none of these things are going to succeed in the Senate. They're not going to pass. The Democrats want it that way because they really don't want to do these things. That they could use the same bully pulpit that the Republicans have used to get this agenda passed. But you're right, Eugene, the Democrats are not friends of the people. They're making it clear once again that they're not friends of the people, and they don't care because they're not going to get fired from their jobs for, most of them for another at least 2 years. They can make plenty of money in between now and then. So when some of them lose in the midterms, and I believe some of them will, I think the Democrats will lose some seats in the House. Don't know if they'll lose the majority, but I think there will be some losses in the midterms that the Democrats are going to suffer because of these things that we're talking about right now. And I can't see them, I hate to say it, but I can't see them winning a re-election. Well, it wouldn't be a re-election because Joe Biden isn't going to last that long. Right. But I'm not wishing anything ill on the guy. But come on. I mean, but Kamala Harris, no, she's not going to win election in 2024, not with this track record. And honestly, I think by then the terror of Trump is going to wear off on some people, and people are just going to be like, look, if it's this bad with Democrats in power, then why bother? I think we're going to go right back to people just not voting because they're seeing quite literally we put these people in office after they promise us that they're going to be better than the last guy and work for the people, and they're just playing right in our faces like, nope, screw all of you. Thanks for giving us our job. Now get out. So,
You know, I'm glad you brought up the George Floyd Act too, because, well, I was listening to NPR earlier for whatever that's worth, and they were saying this is some big step forward as it concerns criminal justice or the criminal legal system. You know, that's them showing the promise of Black Lives Matter or whatever it may be. I'm curious, your specific thoughts, your critique perhaps of this George Floyd, I think it's the George Floyd Justice Act that is allegedly the banner legislation Democrats have passed to, I don't know, do something.
I think it's really shameful that they actually named it after George Floyd. I'm really insulted that they named it after George Floyd because the focus of the act is on banning chokeholds. George Floyd was not murdered by a chokehold. And in cases where Black people and other marginalized people have been murdered by cops choking them to death, the police departments usually already have a ban on chokeholds, but what they do is they just call it something else. That, you know, the city will pass some legislation saying, oh, we're banning chokeholds to hold the cops accountable. But then the cops keep strangling people to death. But what they do is they just go through their training manuals and exchange out the phrase chokehold for some other technical term so they can say, see, we complied with the ban on chokeholds. We don't do them anymore. So that means nothing. The focus on banning racial profiling. Haven't we tried this before? How are you going to ban an institution that is rooted in racist white supremacist ideology from doing what it's designed to do? You got to get rid of that racist white supremacist institution, and you're not going to ban racial profiling. If you're going to ban something, I'd like to know what the penalties are first of all, and they're nothing. And second, George Floyd wasn't really racially profiled. He was targeted because he allegedly committed a petty misdemeanor civil offense. So the issue of criminalizing people for committing these silly, petty civil offenses, that's the issue that's not addressed in this bill. And then there's no mention of the 1033 program and the connection between the Department of Defense, excuse me, and militarism and imperialism around the world, and the DOD selling or giving away its cast-off weapons of war to local and state police departments, even campus police and public school safety resource offices. So this bill is an insult to the work of Black Lives Matter organizers in the chapters, in the states, on the streets. It's an insult to George Floyd and his family. And honestly, it's an insult to the struggle against racist police terrorism that we've been in all our lives. I'm actually glad that it's probably not going to pass the Senate because it's going to be just as ineffective as Barack Obama's task force on 21st century policing was.
You know, the chokehold piece is so important. I mean, obviously, you're 100% correct on how it's happened. I mean, obviously, we're sitting here in New York. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Eric Garner. I mean, they had some weird name for it, as you pointed out, but as I always point out, it wasn't even just the chokehold that was banned. The way, if people remember the video of Eric Garner where they were piling on top of him, that is also a banned procedure inside the NYPD manual. So they used two banned procedures, killed someone, and then everyone got off scot-free. And it just, and you mentioned this already, Jackie, but it brings me back to so much of the the frustration with this is it's so clear that people are saying we want fewer police in our communities, we want alternatives to the police in our communities, we want more control over the police in our communities, and somehow the reforms always seem to end up being, let's find some way to give the police more money and more resources to change their own behavior, Jackie.
I mean, I can't help but point out that none of the legislation that ever comes from politicians actually attacks the issue of the outsized influence of police unions. They put something in this piece of legislation about reforming qualified immunity, but they don't talk about getting rid of it completely, because Eugene, if I commit a crime and I take your life, there is no piece of, other than if it's in self-defense, I'm going to prison.
Right.
I'm going to prison. And there is no union that is going to come and protect me from going to prison for taking your life that's not in self-defense, because of the job that I do. When you look at that aspect of this legislation alone, and you look at the fact, well, I look at the fact that the people who drafted this legislation, they're not stupid. They're not unintelligent people. They're not unaware of the issues. They're not uneducated, if people want to, make a big deal about that. But a lot of these people are attorneys. They have legal training and backgrounds, and they intentionally sat there and drafted a piece of legislation that did exactly what you said, Eugene: gives the police more money, maintains the power of the police, and maintains the status quo of police departments being a tyrannical, oppressive force in Black, brown, poor, working class communities. And when you come to that conclusion, or when you make those connections, I can only come to the conclusion that the politicians are, once again, they're working for the police. They don't want to change anything about policing in this country because they like the way policing is carried out in this country. And it's all just another piece of kabuki theater, window dressing, three-card Molly that Democrats play to appeal to, whatever emotional response they think they're going to get from people. But we know, Eugene, that people in the streets, people are tired. People are tired of being jerked around, and I am thinking that there's going to be more protests this summer, and I hope there will be, because this is just such an egregious insult to the struggle that people were engaged in just this past year.
I think that's 100% true, and I mean, they burned down a police station in Minneapolis last year. I mean, if that doesn't show the level of how people are really feeling, the level of frustration, all those different pieces. I mean, Juan, you were there. We were both there together. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but I mean, to me, I think what Jackie is saying was the 100% feeling that I remember, Juan, having on the streets, of how people were just fed up.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting when we see like both the stimulus and the stimulus checks, and like the lack of action when it comes to the $15 minimum wage. Like, it's very clear that there is no party for working class people within the Democrats. Like, it's not a thing. There is a party for conservatives. There is a party for fascists. There's a party for racists, but there's no party for working class people. This whole like wrap around, this whole like we want to make sure that we restore democracy is like how they play within their field, how they play within their courts, how they talk to one another, but it has nothing to do with working class people. Because Biden saying that he can't do anything, when we just had Trump, who wasn't doing stuff for working class people, but was doing things. He was getting things done. He was getting things done that he was saying. He was getting racist things passed. He was making sure that there was tax cuts for folks. And like, that's what working class people need. They need a presidential, like, they need a president who is taking action, like truly taking action for working class people. And I feel like if they lose either the House or the Senate, it's beneficial for Biden, because what they were saying the night of election night, Biden is great working with both sides. He's great being bipartisan, because then they have somebody to blame. They could be like, the Republicans are not allowing us to do stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point, and it reminds me of another piece as well, Jackie, that fades into all this is what they will fight for. I mean, we just saw this Neera Tanden saga. For people who don't know, Neera Tanden was the nominee for the Office of Management and Budget. And, you know, you got the chief of staff of the president saying we're going to fight our guts out for Neera Tanden, and Jen Psaki, you know, really defending her aggressively. You got New York Times columnists that are like, anyone who's against Neera Tanden must just be against women of color being in positions of power. You know, I mean, forget the fact that the next in line was a black woman, but I guess that didn't matter to them. But be that as it may, I mean, it was like 32 million people could get a raise from raising the minimum wage. And it's like, oh, well, because of two made up rules, we can't do it. But then it's like, oh, Neera Tanden isn't going to be confirmed. And it's like a 5-alarm fire in the White House, Jackie.
It's ridiculous. And it's so ridiculous because the Biden administration, Biden and Kamala Harris, let's not forget that it's both of them. It's not just him, it's the both of them. Nominated this woman who, after they spent, a year beating progressives over the head about you need to vote for Joe Biden after Kamala Harris, you know, dragged him on that debate stage, which she should have done. That was right. But then she turned right around and was like, ooh, I'm so excited that Joe Biden picked me. That was just like the worst pick me in the universe. It was so Jesus. But that beat progressives over the head about you got to vote for Joe Biden because we got to get rid of Trump and we can't let Trump have another term, blah, blah, blah. And who do they choose to control the Congress's purse strings but the woman who spent her career actively hating on progressives and progressive policies, wants to cut Social Security, was not in support of raising the minimum wage, abused her staff at Think Progress, which was the left outlet of the Center for American Progress, allegedly, when they supported Bernie Sanders, you know, and the whole flap online about going after Sanders supporters and Bernie Sanders himself. Yeah, she was mean to Republicans, but the Republicans are an easy target because they're easy. I mean, they don't care that you hate them, you know. But this was the Biden administration's first pick. So again, it's like they're like, you have to vote for us. You have to vote for us because we're going to make things so much better for you. And the people they choose to head the agencies to carry out their agenda doesn't reflect any of the things that any of the people they said had to vote for them wanted. No, it's another one of those things where, you know what, I'm glad she wasn't confirmed, but I really hope people got the message from Biden and Harris that they hate you. They hate you, progressives. They hate your progressive policies. They really don't care what you think. They're glad you voted for them, but they never intended to do anything with Bernie Sanders and his progressive platform. And nominating Neera Tanden was yet another piece of evidence of that truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe it was Maya Angelou who said, believe people when they tell you who they are the first time. With the Democrats, people seem to keep forgetting, but we will keep reminding them, as you will as well, Jackie Lukman, on Lukman Nation, as well as by any means necessary. Fantastic radio program. Jackie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, you know, it's our pleasure. Well, we want to slightly shift gears here. Before we move stories, Juan, we were talking earlier in the day and we found an interesting video that we just wanted to show here briefly. This is a clip from a campaign rally for the MAS party in Bolivia. It was the party formerly of Evo Morales that you may remember just won the recent election. There are some lower level elections that are coming up, so there's a lot of campaigning going on around the country. It's a pretty inspiring speech. We just wanted to show you a little clip of it here.
Así que, compañeros, los convoco a reflexionar. O descolonizamos las Fuerzas Armadas o permitimos que haya golpe de Estado. Y lo mismo con la policía. Y lo mismo con el Poder Judicial. No podemos seguir siendo tímidos, contemplativos, complacientes. Nos meten a la cárcel simplemente porque tenemos cara de indígenas, sin preguntarnos nada. Nos disparan, nos masacran, nos fusilan con la mayor impunidad. La democracia no se ha hecho para que hablen los fusiles ni los cañones. La democracia se ha hecho para que gobierne el pueblo y tenemos que gobernar, queridos compañeros y compañeras.
I mean, really just amazing determination when you think really just a year ago about there was a coup in Bolivia. You know, many of these people were being hunted by the police. They were being charged in many different ways. People were being assaulted. I think some people were even killed. And then through an amazing democratic movement, paralyzed the country with strikes and protests, forced a coup government to bring in new elections, and then won by a bigger margin than they've won before, and now look like they might be out to sweep into even more power at a local level. And I think that's an important message about the struggle of the people, the possibilities of the struggle of the people, and the challenges that are often faced, but how they can, well, I don't want to say easily, but how they certainly can be overcome. So
Yeah,
just a little palate cleanser there, Juan.
Oh yeah, I feel like that's so true. I mean, I can't help but connect like his speech with the conversation that we just had. I mean, I feel like there's something that is so important. It's not like one or the other. Like, you know, last summer we saw a lot of calls for the defunding of the police, and now we're seeing like a government that was really put in place by people turning out to the polls. But this is not a party that represents people. Like, this is not a party that represents working class people. And we need both. We need to make sure that, one, we have a party in place that represents working class people, but also that the arm like of the state is also a representative of the people. Like, it's not one or the other. We've seen it so many times. Democratically elected governments be toppled down through coups, a lot of them funded by the United States, but really because they keep the same structures of imperialism in place. They keep the same structures of oppression in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, we're going to turn our attention to Ecuador. And as we change topics, we are very honored to be joined here by Ben Norton, who is a journalist, an assistant editor with The Gray Zone, and also co-host of the podcast, Moderate Rebels. Ben, thanks so much for being with us.
To be here, Eugene, on your other great show. I used to go on your previous show, By Any Means Necessary, so I'm glad to see you branching out.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's an honor. You know, Ben, you were recently targeted for your factual reporting on, well, several things around the recent election that took place in Ecuador, some of the context of that election. There was, an attempt to get your article removed from basically anywhere where it was. I think Monthly Review brought your article down, and you have detailed the history of one of the participants in this electoral struggle, Yaku Perez, who many were holding up as a progressive person. So there's a lot to this story, Ben, but I guess my first question for you in a way is, this is factual reporting. There's no real challenges to what you wrote in like an actual, is this true sense, just insinuations. What do you think those who would criticize your piece were so afraid of in terms of the impact it could have?
Well, Eugene, I'm glad you began this segment by talking about Bolivia because, of course, Bolivia and Ecuador being very close to each other, sharing a lot of political ties and historical ties, the situation is quite similar in both countries. You mentioned that there was a horrible military coup in Bolivia in November of 2019, backed by the United States and these right-wing forces. Well, you mentioned this candidate, Yaku Perez. He's a presidential candidate in third place in Ecuador, and he's running this kind of NGO-style liberal campaign. He calls himself an environmentalist and a progressive. Well, he supported that coup in Bolivia, which is incredible, and that really exposes, that's all you need to know about this candidate. He claims to be on the left, but he supports right-wing racist coups against democratically elected leaders like Evo Morales. So why are people, and specifically when I say people, I mean high-profile academics, many based in the United States, who have links to a lot of these kinds of big foundations and nonprofit organizations and NGOs in the nonprofit industrial complex. Why are they trying to censor my reporting? Because it exposes that very same narrative, that they're the real left, that they are the progressives, and that the actual left-wing forces led by the socialist anti-imperialist movement in Ecuador, the Correistas, following former President Rafael Correa, well, the academics and the NGOs and the liberal forces want to demonize them, call them authoritarian, they say, claim that they're corrupt, which is part of this legal warfare strategy, this lawfare strategy. So they're trying to censor my reporting because it exposes that their narrative that they're supposedly the left is simply not true.
I think that's an extremely important point to recognize, because the impact of this seems deeply important, right? I mean, obviously, we know the United States plays such a huge role in disorganizing, destabilizing, well, countries all over the world, but certainly in Latin America. And it seems to me, tell me what you think, Ben, that the ability of people in this country, in the United States, to get accurate information is absolutely critical if there's going to be, real solidarity with movements that have demonstratedly changed things for the people.
That's absolutely right. And when people have access to that information, not just people in the United States, but in Ecuador, they realize that these candidates don't represent their interests. They realize that these candidates have supported right-wing military coups. In the case of Yaku Perez, he has demonized poor people in Ecuador, claiming that he opposes the proposal to give poor and working class families $1,000 checks because, as he claimed, they would supposedly spend all the money on beer in one night. So a lot of Ecuadorians don't know these facts, and instead there's constant media propaganda. The media in Ecuador, like in many countries, is controlled by these right-wing oligarch families. And then finally, this brings us to a crucial point, which is that when the U.S. is trying to manufacture consent for these coups, international intervention, for regime change operations, they don't need to manufacture consent on the right. Right-wing conservative people they think they're all just communists, they're Castro Chavistas, we have to overthrow them. They don't care about discussions of democracy and human rights. The people that that the U.S. government, the ruling class, the media outlets are trying to manufacture consent for are liberals, are people who call themselves progressives. And we see in Ecuador, this is another classic example of how they're trying to demonize the actual popular leftist movement led by former President Rafael Correa, represented by this young candidate, Andrés Arauz, who won the first round of the election in a landslide. But they want us to believe doesn't represent the real progressive forces. Instead, it's this other candidate, Yaku Perez, who just so happens to support all of Washington's priorities in terms of its imperial geopolitical interests in the region.
You were there in Ecuador. I mean, I'm curious to hear more about that, because I think that is important about who really has support on the ground and the change people want to see made. What were your impressions being there for the first round?
Well, it's clear if you go to rallies that were held by the Citizens Revolution movement, that is the movement launched by former President Correa, who was a socialist and anti-imperialist, their rallies are enormous, and they're working class, they're diverse, not just diverse in terms of age, but diverse racially, which is very important in Ecuador because the right-wing elites are often as light-skinned as I am. They're descendants of the European colonialists. And the Correísta movement is a working-class, multiracial movement and multi-generational. There are young people, there are older people, retired people. And the reality is, if you look at the constituency and the protests or rather the rallies, not the protests, of the right-wing main candidate, Guillermo Lasso, it's very clear he represents the elite 10 to 15% of the country, most of whom are, again, they're as white as I am, even though they live in Latin America, and they're wealthy. They have a lot of money. And I went to the rallies and demonstrations organized by the Correísta movement, and I interviewed people, and I published those interviews at the Gray Zone. And if you also just look at the polls, it's not even just my personal experience. The polling shows that the Correísta movement is by far the most popular movement in the country, that Rafael Correa himself is the most popular leader in Ecuador's modern history, and that despite the constant demonization in the media, and I need to stress this point again, like in the US, the media in Ecuador is controlled by right-wing oligarchs. You'll never see a pro-Correísta voice in mainstream media. But despite the constant propaganda campaign, the socialist Citizens Revolution movement is still the most popular force in Ecuador and won the first round of the election in a landslide. And if the vote is free and fair in April, they're going to win in the second round. That's why the vote needs to be free and fair. That's why it's important to talk about what's going on with the attempt to try to steal the election from the Correístas.
Ben, you yourself and the Gray Zone in general, you all have done extensive reporting on the impact of these various U.S. soft power programs around the world, but certainly in Latin America. Talk a little bit about the impact of them, because I think one of the implicit things I've seen in criticism of the piece you have on Yaku Perez, but I think other criticisms I've seen of other gray zone pieces on this issue is sort of like, well, maybe someone did take a check from the NED, but like, what does that really matter? Blah, 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 that kind of thing, that it's really not that harmful. So I was hoping you could talk about the real impact of these soft power programs on popular movements in Latin America.
Well, first of all, it's not just that they're funded by these soft power organizations, regime change organizations, CIA cutouts, etc. It's also that they're doing the work of those, they're representing the interests of those institutions. That's why they're being funded. The point that they're being funded is not the main scandal. The scandal is that they're serving the interests, essentially, of the CIA, of the U.S. government, of the U.S. embassy. So, I mean, in the case of Yaku Perez, he's actually a very important point. He's an example of this, because Yaku Perez has said in his interviews that he would not think twice about signing a free trade agreement with the United States. Wow. Quite a progressive thing, free trade deals with the United States. He also at the same time has said that he would not sign an agreement with China because China has a horrible human rights record, he said. As if Washington has some great human rights record. I mean, that says everything. Also, I should point out that one of the people behind the censorship campaign trying to, well, unfortunately, successfully getting my article retracted from Monthly Review is the partner of Yaku Perez and his campaign advisor, Manuela Pic. She is a prominent academic who teaches in the United States, and she's also French and Brazilian. She's not Ecuadorian, but she has played a very prominent role in Ecuadorian politics. When the socialist anti-imperialist president Rafael Correa was in power, she was helping lead protests against him. Again, this is someone who's not an Ecuadorian national. And when she was arrested at a violent protest and was deported because she violated her visa. She was in Ecuador on a tourist visa, and you can't violate the law if you're on a tourist visa. She was deported, and she turned herself into a martyr. And her campaign against Correa was funded by numerous members of the European Union and by the European Commission. So the fact that she was funded, it's not just that she was funded, it's the fact that she is doing work representing the interests of European oligarchs against Correa, who was a socialist, who was an anti-imperialist, who kicked out not just U.S. but also European corporations, who entered an economic trade bloc with Venezuela and Cuba and Bolivia and Nicaragua called the Bolivarian Alliance, the ALBA. The point is that the U.S. and European Union have a vested interest in trying to undermine these policies, so they fund people who are representing their interests. It's simply that obvious. And in the case of Ecuador, it's undeniable that these people they're the front line of the so-called progressive opposition to the left-wing Correista movement. And the reality, as I showed in my reporting, is that they're actually not progressive.
Well, I think it's worth noting that Monthly Review, it's shameful, I think they took it down. It's still up at the Gray Zone, still up at People's Dispatch. I mean, it almost feels, in a way, and I'm glad you mentioned the sort of range of academics and others that were involved. I believe Judith Butler signed on to it. But, I mean, in a way, Ben, it felt to me like that in and of itself was indicative. Not that I'm against professors, not that I'm against academics. Anyone who's watching with a PhD who knows me, I love you. But be that as it may, it wasn't like it was a list of like coal miners or trade. I mean, it just felt like something of where it even came from spoke to me, at least, to some element of what was really, the nature of such a campaign like this.
Well, and it's so incredible because we do have a lot of comrades and friends and allies who are academics, and there is a really devastating right now attack on tenure, on academic freedom, on people who are left-wing academics, who are revolutionaries, who are socialists and anti-imperialists. Right now, as we speak, there's an attempt to get this British anti-imperialist David Miller fired for criticizing Zionism. So it's incredible to see that academics, many of whom are in the United States, but also in Latin America and Europe, are trying to censor my factual reporting. Well, so they're attacking free speech. Well, right-wing forces are trying to censor the free speech of anti-Zionists and anti-imperialists. I mean, they're feeding into the censorship campaign of progressives, of the silencing of people who are speaking out against empire. And the ultimate irony of this letter is it was signed by many of these liberal academics. You mentioned Judith Butler. I have to say that I think there's a possibility she could have been motivated because I helped expose how Judith Butler, I wrote an article exposing how she donated multiple times to Kamala Harris, a Senate and then later a presidential candidate. And this is during the primary when Bernie was a candidate. And it's pretty ironic because in many ways, Yaku Perez is a kind of Kamala Harris style figure who pretends like he's a progressive while supporting very reactionary policies and supporting imperialism. But I have to say that the ultimate irony of this letter is that they were trying to accuse me of being somehow anti-indigenous or even racist. And and claim that I criticized decolonial scholarship. And for me, this is the ultimate irony of this dystopian world we live in right now, where liberal academics, many of whom supported a right-wing racist coup in Bolivia backed by the US government, are accusing me supposedly of being racist and criticizing decolonial scholarship when they're the ones who are supporting racist coups and they're the ones objectively supporting US imperialism. The reality is that there is a progressive, working class, anti-imperialist movement in Ecuador. It's called the Correísta movement. There is a similar movement in Bolivia led by the MAS party of Evo Morales, which they oppose. They call authoritarian and extremist. So the reality is that they're the ones who are reflecting this kind of colonial politics. But as we see now with the Biden administration, the US empire is trying to rebrand and trying to portray itself as a progressive force that supports environmentalism, that opposes extractivism. And of course, they're distorting. It's greenwashing. Of course, we should support environmental policies, but they're not environmentalists. This is part of their pinkwashing and greenwashing campaign. And ironically, what they're doing is just trying to rebrand the 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine. And it's the same old kind of British Empire colonizing civilizational mission, but that now they're just doing it in new progressive colors.
One thing I want to pick up on, Ben, that you mentioned that I think is important, and in terms of, perhaps some of the things folks who are criticizing you would like us to not be paying attention to, is this issue of attempts to try to steal the election in somehow, some way here in the second round. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that, because it does really seem that the campaign is in overdrive to some degree to do whatever they can to make sure Arauz does not win.
Well, I mentioned that the Correísta movement is the major force in Ecuadorian politics. Honestly, it's the only real significant political force. The neoliberal right-wing forces just are so disorganized. They're not united. They don't have a working base. I mean, the right wing in Ecuador has been decimated and really discredited by the current regime of Lenín Moreno, backed by the US, which has a 7% approval rating. I mean, they've just been destroyed. So it's clear that the Correístas represent the actual opposition. And if there's a free and fair election, they will take power. So that's why the Moreno administration, with the backing of the US government, under both Trump and now under Biden, has continued trying to steal the election. And not only the United States is meddling in internal Ecuadorian democracy, but also the Organization of American States, the OAS, which played a key role in the Bolivia coup, and the extremely right-wing government of Colombia. I mean, Colombia is probably the most right-wing government in the region. A recent scandal exposed that they killed more than 6,400 innocent Colombians. Wow. And claimed that they were socialist guerrillas. I mean, this is a very bloody, drug-linked right-wing regime that funds death squads. And the Colombian chief prosecutor, the attorney general, is in Ecuador. He traveled to Ecuador and met with the Attorney General of Ecuador, who is also a very corrupt figure, who was recently awarded, just a week ago, the Biden State Department gave the Ecuadorian chief prosecutor an award for supposed anti-corruption efforts, as she's involved in corruption and as she's trying to steal the election. I mean, talk about Orwellian. It's incredible. The U.S. government was clearly rewarding her for her work on behalf of Washington. But we see that Colombia, the Ecuadorian regime, and the U.S. embassy are all trying to steal the election from Andrés Arauz. And what is their strategy? It's twofold. First of all, there's this attempt to try to recount, claiming that the vote in the first round was not accurate. But then the more insidious campaign is there's this right-wing conspiracy theory. They're accusing Andrés Arauz of being funded by a Colombian socialist guerrilla movement called the ELN, the National Liberation Army. And as their so-called evidence, there was a video circulating in social media that was released by the Colombian government. And it's 3 men wearing masks with a big ELN flag behind them. And on the bottom of the video, there's a subtitle that says, "In a Colombian forest," because that's what guerrillas do. They make it clear that where they are with a subtitle at the bottom. I mean, it's so absurd. And what actually happened is that these 3 men, an expert on birds, exposed that these 3 men actually were in a Western Ecuadorian forest, a rare bird that is not located in Colombia. So we know that the Colombian authorities were behind faking a video, or rather the Ecuadorian authorities were behind faking a video of 3 men who just had masks on with an ELN flag, claiming that they gave money to Andrés Arauz. But the Colombian government and the Ecuadorian government, backed by the U.S. State Department, are trying to disqualify Andrés Arauz with this fake evidence claiming that he was funded by Colombian guerrillas. I mean, it would be funny. It would almost kind of be like slapstick comedy if it weren't so sad and if it weren't such a blatant indictment of what the role that the U.S. Embassy actually plays and the U.S. State Department actually plays in meddling in foreign countries' democracies.
In a Colombian farce. Ben Norton, assistant editor with The Gray Zone, co-host of Moderate Rebels. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Eugene.
No, the pleasure was all ours. We're going to keep the show going here just real quick. Want to remind people you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron. Everything we do is brought to you by you. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. We want to turn to the fight for 15 now as we continue the show. As we mentioned at the top, there are people in Congress trying to let it go, but there are workers all around this country that are fighting very hard. And we are very honored to be joined here by Aisha Francis and by Eric Winston, who are leaders with NC Raise Up and the Fight for 15. Aisha, Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having
the pleasure
me.
is all ours. Aisha, I'll start with you here. Just first question. I'll ask you both this question, but I'll start with you, Aisha. Just tell people who are watching now, why is it so important that we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour?
It is extremely important that we raise this minimum wage to $15 an hour because it is, first of all, we're in the middle of this pandemic. And let's not play games. If they do this right now, we are able to spend more money, patronize these small businesses that are suffering the most, and that money then goes back into the government. Everybody wins. So what's the holdup? So that's one reason that it's extremely important that we get America back on its feet. And that's how you rebuild. The other reason it's very important that we do this simply because minorities are so tired of just getting by. We need to be able to live. We need to be able to not have to rob Peter to pay Paul and rob Paul to pay Joe and figure it all out in the end. All we want to do is live comfortably, be able to pay our bills, be able to feed our families, be able to have leisure time with our children, to do things that we want to do with them as parents, as grandparents, and what have you. It's also extremely important because we have a lot of people that are in low wage paying jobs that are older, who have health conditions, who have to decide whether they buy food or medicine. And that's not fair. Mm-hmm. It is totally inhumane, if you ask me. We are the richest country in the world. The richest.
That's right.
In the world. And America is always so willing to go to help this country and help that country. Can we mow our own backyard first?
I think there's a lot of people asking that question, Aisha, when we see these huge sums of money being spent on things that are not working class people. Eric, I'm curious, the same question for you is what brings you to this fight? Why is this so important to you to be fighting for the fight for a $15 hour minimum wage?
First of all, I want to say thank you for having me, giving us a platform, and you know, my choice in the fight was pretty simple. It's a humanitarian thing, man. People should have the right to work 40-hour job and live 40-hour a week job and live comfortable. People should be able to afford to pay insurance. People should be able to afford to pay medicine, pay for their medicine, and a $15 minimum wage gives low-wage workers all across this country to live in these re-gentrified cities that are pushing the poor out, and it's it's just a humanitarian issue for me.
I think that is one of the things that so many of us are thinking about, the humanitarian piece. I'm glad you used that word because, and as you mentioned, Aisha, we're in this pandemic, right? And everybody is saying we're all about essential workers. We're all about essential workers. That's, we're clapping for people we're doing, and as we should. But my question for you, Aisha, is how does it feel to be in a situation where on the one hand, everyone's saying, yes, great for essential workers, but on the other hand, there are still people saying, well, I don't know if they should get paid.
Anybody who opposes it, I challenge them. And this is not my first time putting this challenge out there. And I'll do it again and I'll keep doing it. I challenge you to live one day, a whole 24-hour day, in the life of any of us. Any of us. Pick who you want to, because there's enough of us to go around. Believe that. One day, from the time we get up to the time we get on the bus, work our job, get off from our job, get back on the bus, go home, and figure out the things that we have to figure out. I know, and they know, and everybody else knows, they'll be lost at getting on the bus.
Come on, you already
walk one day in my life, just one. It's only going to take one for you to realize how silly you are.
It seems like these people are so out of touch. I don't know. I've never been a congressperson. I've never been I don't know. But it just feels to me, Eric, when I see the conversation that, and you mentioned humanitarianism, that we've just forgotten the human beings that are really behind this. I just don't know. I mean, I read an amazing thing the other day that if they did this Raise the Wage Act, that the average person could see $3,000 a year in raises, and which one is good, but then it just reminds you how many people are living in poverty. And it just seems to me, Eric, that a lot of people who are talking about the minimum wage are out of touch with what's really going on with regular people.
And that's so true. But I just want to make one point,
please,
about these companies and these congressmen. They've made billions of dollars of profits off the backs of low-wage workers. We run these companies. We make sure these companies run. Without us, these companies wouldn't run, man. And we kind of asking and pleading, and I'm tired of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not asking to plead no more. We demanding, and that's why us here at the Fight for 15 NC Raise Up, we take this serious, because a $15 minimum wage, it wouldn't hurt these billion-dollar companies. Just that their profits wouldn't be 500. It wouldn't be $1 billion. It'd be 500 million.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still 500 million in profits, and these companies got to learn how to put profits over people, man. Point blank, period. And it's like it kind of pisses you off, to be honest. it kind of pisses you off when
That
they
it does.
preach they as we're taught growing up, we're taught to be productive citizens and believe in democracy, you know. But in all actuality, it's not for the people at all. It's for the rich, not the poor. And so with that being said, I'm here not only to fight, but I'm here to educate people on what's going on because a lot of people really don't know what's going on. And that's our job here at NC Raise Up is to educate as many people as possible what's going on. We do have a voice. We do matter. It just showed by the pandemic on how, you know, I really hate that word, essential workers. I hate that word because, oh, how come all of a sudden we've been essential? Man, we've been here. We've been doing this, you know? And these people, these policymakers, sitting up in their air conditioned offices, riding in their limos, don't know the first thing about struggle or nothing, So it's just disheartening, to say the least, when you see the single mother out here with the 4 or 5 kids, working 3, 4 jobs. They can't afford to raise their children. That's a whole nother separate issue, And then they're working, they cure all these health problems. That's a whole nother separate issue. You know what I'm saying? It's time that we take the fight to these policymakers, man. And that's the mantra that we're building here at NC Raise Up. We're not waiting for the fight to come to us. We're bringing the fight to them, taking it to the streets.
I really appreciate that because I agree with you. It's frustrating. It's infuriating. It's just the anger you see because, there's so much wealth around us. You hear statistics like billionaires gained $2 trillion in the pandemic. And I'm just thinking, for me, and probably for y'all, everyone's thinking this is the toughest year we've ever had, probably in many ways. People losing their loved ones, all these other things. And billionaires are making more money in 1 year than they've ever made before. Something about that is just so upside down. I don't even know how to place it or where to put it. But, I'll say for myself, one of the things that honestly helps keep me grounded is when I see that NC Raise Up social media and that y'all are out here and pushing back and fighting. And I'll ask you both, but Aisha, I'll start with you. Maybe just tell people some about what y'all have been doing, the organizing and the work that y'all have been having, really, I would say, at the tip of the spear for this fight for the whole country.
We've been doing a lot. We've been doing everything within our power. We've been organizing, we've been protesting, we've been we've been doing a whole lot of groundwork. I know that we had an all members meeting this evening where we were discussing that we're going to be speaking. Some of our members are going to be speaking to some of these lawmakers directly. So we're definitely hard at work. We've had some victories in certain places, starting with my own personal victory, where my job, where we did 2 strikes at my job and had them to implement a real COVID policy because people were getting sick at my job, and their so-called policy was, if you feel sick, stay home. If you have it, stay home. That's not policy. That's just normal. That's what's gonna happen.
Right.
But because of our actions, we now have COVID policy where if we have to get tested, they're paying for it. If somebody gets sick at the job, if they have to quarantine, whoever has to quarantine, they're paying them throughout their whole 14-day quarantine. So that's the victory within itself. My thing about this whole $15 an hour thing is that we work for billion-dollar companies. And the sad part is we sit every day, we work every day, and watch the money being made. Yet they want to slap us in the face and tell us they can't pay us.
Mm.
I don't know who really to call crazy here. Are we crazy for working, or are they crazy for thinking that we don't see the money that they make?
Right.
But we've been doing a lot. The fight is far from over. Far from over. Far from over. And this whole little setback, it's disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting. Not going to discourage any of us, not going to make any of us feel defeated. This is what they don't know. What they don't know is this is where we rev up the engines this is where we really get revved up. Okay, time to play game, time to play for real now. This is where our energy comes from. And this is where we're going to take our disgust and we're going to let it resonate into our power. We're going to let it resonate into resilience.
We want to turn quickly here to Juan in the booth. I think you wanted to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, all power to y'all, all that work, that amazing work that y'all doing. I just wanna make sure that that's being pushed. The work that y'all doing and the fight that y'all doing is really the way any change happens. It's not through electing people that will promise whatever, but it's really being on the ground and you are the people that are fighting for yourselves. And I think that's what we need to be constantly pushing to the forefront. These politicians will say whatever. They will say whatever to get elected. But unless we're putting that fire under their asses, that change doesn't come. I just want to ask, how do you feel about, I don't know if y'all heard this, but there was a lot of people saying that we got to vote for Biden and put fire under his ass after he gets elected and into the White House. A lot of those people, where are they? How does that make you feel? How does it make you feel to a lot of folks be sidelining the issues, but then they're nowhere to be found now that he's backtracking?
Personally, I was kind of skeptical from the get-go. And I just want to say this. Unions are the real game changer. And that's what we're fighting for.
Come on.
The $15 minimum wage it's cool, but the union aspect is much needed behind it. Because we need the power to negotiate our work with these companies. And until this administration gets it in their head that unions are the way of the future, until we educate people about unions, that's the key in my opinion. And as far as your question goes, these people that was and just by these people are shadow people. You won't see them. They're not out here in the streets. They're not out here trying to educate people on what's really going on. And they're not here for liberation of people. And for those people, I have a real distaste and dislike for.
Go ahead, please.
But as far as Joe Biden is concerned, I was always skeptical. Just to keep it all the way honest with you, politicians and the higher 1% don't want to see. They thrive off separation, division. They don't want to see people come together and people rise. Because when people come together and people rise, people make change. They don't want to make change. They want things to stay the same so they can get rich and stay rich. And
I hear you.
That's pretty much it.
Well, let me ask you just both this final question. Eric, I'll start with you, and then I'll come to Aisha. Eric, if there's one thing that you want people who are watching this to know about y'all's fight, what would that be?
If it's one thing I want people to know about our fight, it's not just about raising the minimum wage to $15. It's about unions. And we're building worker power. We're letting people know that we do have a voice, and there's no more division amongst us. Black, brown, white, queer, straight, trans, bipolar, it doesn't matter. We're tired of the division, and we're tired of people. We're tired of the 1% and the policymakers thriving on hurt, despair. We're done with that. And I'm putting this out there that y'all think a minor setback for us is motivation. So this y'all, they just better beware, because we finna put pressure on them.
Aisha, same question. There's one thing you wanted people to know about y'all's fight, what would that be? Aisha, I'm sorry, maybe I cut out there. If there's one thing that you wanted people to know about y'all's fight, what would that be?
The one thing that I would want everybody to know is don't be afraid to fight. Don't be afraid to speak up, stand out, and let these businesses know that we actually run their business.
Come on.
Without us, they have no business. And as far as these politicians go, this Senate person, ghost, because that's what I'm going to call them, because where did they even come from? The parliamentarian person, wherever you are, whoever you are, you have no right to decide on something that you have never lived.
That's right.
You have no right to say, these people, we as minorities, we as low-wage workers, or however you choose to categorize us, you have no right to say that we don't deserve to live and not struggle. And to you personally, parliamentarian ghost, please come walk a day in any of our shoes. Any given day, my door is open. You can take my whole day. I'm freely giving it away. Don't ask me any questions about anything. I want you to figure it out every day the way that I have to figure it out every day. I'm not going to tell you nothing because I had to figure this thing out. But as far as my fellow workers in this industry, don't let these people fool you into thinking that you have no power. Because in all actuality, you hold every drop of power there is. So use it. Don't shut up and go in the corner and be quiet. Because at the end of the day, without you, there is no them. That people can come and patronize a business all they want to, but if there's nobody to work it, what happens? Nothing. So don't be afraid. And
That's
anybody who's in politics and opposes this $15 minimum wage, my day is available anytime you want to take it. I'll give it away.
Well, hey, I really appreciate y'all. I'd be remiss if I didn't say quickly, too, the Senate parliamentarian, for those who want to know, makes $172,500. So
and
there
that's
you have
the
it
thing.
right there.
That's the thing. Like these politicians get free health care provided through taxpayer dollars, and then they're like, no health care for working class people. They get paid thousands of dollars while people are struggling on a day-to-day basis. The minimum wage, there should be a cap for the maximum wage. What do you mean a minimum wage? Like, what other place would we suffice for the minimum? Like, what does it say about workers? What does it say about the bosses if they're fighting against the minimum wage? They shouldn't be giving us a minimum wage. They're paying us more. I'm sorry, I got hype, Eugene. She got me hype. Aisha.
Yeah, that's what's up. That's what's
Aisha,
up.
you got me hype.
Well, hey, we're trying to bring the struggle to it. This is the freedom side. This so we can get hype. We can get hype in
Yes,
here.
sir. Yes, sir.
Hey.
Let them know.
Oh, Eric. What happened?
Don't get too hyped though.
He got hyped too.
That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Eric Winston, Aisha Francis, leaders with North Carolina raised up in the fight for 15. Y'all always have a spot at our table here at the Freedom Side. Thank you so much for joining us.
Salute.
Thank you so
very
much for having me.
Well, and thanks to everybody who watched here tonight on the Freedom Side. We are always so honored to have you with us. As you can see from our last segment, this is a critically important work, critically important voices, critically important struggles that the rest of the so-called media isn't putting in the forefront the way that they should. So don't forget, go to patreon.com/breakthrough news because we are brought to you by you. So only with your help can we keep going and bring important stories to light like what we just saw with workers who are fighting for their lives, for our lives, for everyone's dignity there in the fight for 15. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. This is the Freedom Side, of course, on Breakthrough News. We'll be back with you again next week, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, as we always are. So once again, thanks so much for watching.